Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more dramatic stories like this. Imagine waking up one day, 18 years in the future, and realizing everything you knew about your life had changed. What if you could go back and rewrite the past? Change the tragic events that you and your children suffered through. Could you change the fate of your loved ones? Or would the cruel twists of destiny remain the same? In this story, I found myself in just such a situation. It all began when I was suddenly thrown into a future that seemed so foreign, and yet, in some ways, all too familiar. I had lived a life full of pain and regret, watching as my children, who should have been my greatest joy, became nothing more than pawns in a cruel game. My son, a perfect example of a cannon fodder character, someone destined for tragedy, and my daughter, whose fate was equally grim. But something changed. I was given a second chance, a chance to travel back in time, to that moment when everything started to fall apart. I was determined to change things, to rewrite their tragic ending, and to ensure that my children would have the life they deserved. I couldn't allow them to remain victims in this twisted world, where the whims of fate seemed to dictate their every move. When I first arrived back in time, I was filled with a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. How could I possibly make a difference? I had so little time, so much at stake. My children were still so young, unaware of the dark future that awaited them. They were innocent, filled with potential, and yet, in the original timeline, they were destined to face nothing but heartbreak. My son, though strong-willed, had always been cast aside, seen as nothing more than a tool for others to use. No one cared about his dreams or his potential. He had always been a mere character in someone else's story. My daughter, too, had been treated as a mere accessory, a byproduct of a life filled with manipulation and cruelty. I couldn't stand the thought of them suffering like this again. As I walked through the world I once knew, everything felt different. I had the knowledge of what would happen, but it didn't make the task any easier. Every decision I made felt crucial. One wrong move, and the future I had so desperately hoped for would slip through my fingers like sand. I had to be careful, deliberate in every step I took. The stakes were too high, and my children's happiness depended on the choices I made. I remember the first time I spoke to my son, warning him about the future. At first, he didn't believe me. Who could blame him? The idea that his mother, the one who had failed him in the past, was suddenly telling him she could change everything must have seemed impossible. But when I spoke to him, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. A hope I hadn't seen in so long. It was a moment of realization for both of us. He didn't have to follow the path that had been set for him. He could choose his own destiny. With my daughter, things were more complicated. She had always been more sensitive, more vulnerable to the dangers of the world. In the original timeline, she had been broken by the world around her, by the people who had used her for their own gain. But I had a plan now. I knew how to protect her, how to shield her from the forces that would try to control her. My heart ached at the thought of her suffering again, but I refused to let her become another casualty of fate. As the days passed, I worked tirelessly to change the course of their lives. I made allies, created opportunities, and tried to shield my children from the cruelty of the world. Every small victory felt like a step toward a brighter future, but I knew it wasn't enough. The road ahead was long, and the obstacles were relentless. There were powerful people who wanted to keep things the way they were, people who had their own agendas, people who saw my children as mere tools to be exploited. One day, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. It was a conversation about my children, a conversation that confirmed my worst fears. There were forces at play that I had not anticipated. Forces that were determined to ensure the tragic end I had worked so hard to avoid would come to pass. It wasn't just about fate anymore. It was about power, control, and a battle I had never anticipated. My heart raced as I realized the true magnitude of what I was up against. I couldn't protect my children from everything. There were enemies who had been working in the shadows long before I ever returned to this time, and they wouldn't stop until they had destroyed everything I held dear. Now, as I stand on the precipice of everything I've fought for, I realize the full extent of what's at stake. My children's future is still in jeopardy, and there are still so many obstacles left to overcome. The tragedy that once seemed inevitable is no longer a certainty, but the road to a happy ending is far from clear. I find myself asking, can I truly rewrite their fate? Or is the future still set in stone? No matter what I do, the clock is ticking, and the next chapter of our story will determine everything. Will my children be saved from the tragic path they were meant to walk? Or will fate find a way to tear them away from me once again? The battle is far from over, and the choices I make in the next few moments will decide everything. But I can't help but wonder, is it possible to change a destiny so deeply rooted in tragedy? Or will I lose them all over again? Stay tuned for the next part of our story, where the true enemy will reveal itself, and the final battle for my children's future will begin. The days after I overheard that conversation felt like an eternity. Every moment was filled with a growing sense of urgency, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. The enemies I had once thought were distant threats were now right in front of me, their presence looming over my every step. The truth was more terrifying than I could have imagined. There were forces working behind the scenes, pulling strings, orchestrating events that were meant to lead to my children's downfall. The very people I thought I could trust might be the ones contributing to their suffering. I had made many plans, many promises, but it wasn't enough. The deeper I dug, the darker the truth became. My children's futures weren't just being threatened by fate, but by those who had something to gain from their pain. There were powerful figures who saw my son and daughter as nothing more than pawns in a greater game, a game of control, wealth, and influence. My son, whom I had hoped would be able to carve out a life of his own, was being manipulated by the same people I had once trusted. It was painful to see him so naive, so unaware of the danger surrounding him. I had tried to warn him, tried to show him that there was more to life than just following the path set before him. But he didn't understand. The idea that his life could be shaped by someone else was too foreign to him. Every time I tried to explain, I only saw the confusion in his eyes. Was I too late? Could I still save him from the fate that awaited him? I could feel the weight of my failure pressing down on me, but I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not now. My daughter was even more vulnerable. She had always been so trusting, so eager to please, and yet the world had shown her nothing but cruelty. I had always known she was the more fragile of the two, but seeing her caught up in this web of lies and deceit broke my heart. She had never stood a chance in the original timeline. Every move she made seemed to be a step toward her own undoing. But now, I had the chance to protect her. I couldn't let her slip through my fingers, no matter what it took. As the days passed, the tension only grew. The more I tried to shield them from the danger, the more I realized how deep the conspiracy ran. People who seemed to be friends, allies even, were secretly working against me. The people I thought would help protect my children were the very ones who were setting them up for failure. I had to make a choice, stay on the defensive, always reacting to their moves, or take control and turn the tables on them. But how? How could I fight against a system so ingrained in power and manipulation? Every time I thought I had the upper hand, something shifted. The web of lies tightened, and it became clearer that my children were caught in a much larger struggle, one that I had only just begun to understand. The real danger wasn't just the people who wanted to use my children for their own gain. The true enemy was fate itself. The future I had seen, where my children were left broken, their potential destroyed, was something that I couldn't shake off. It haunted me, reminding me of the ticking clock. The choices I made now would determine everything. And yet, every time I tried to set things right, it felt like I was being pulled further away from the outcome I desired. It wasn't just about my children anymore. It was about breaking free from a cycle of manipulation, control, and predetermined fate. I had to learn to trust myself, to stop second-guessing every move I made. If I kept looking back at the mistakes I had made, I would never be able to move forward. But how could I ignore the past? How could I forget the look of disappointment in my son's eyes, or the way my daughter had once cried herself to sleep, knowing she was nothing more than a tool to others? It was in those moments, when I was at my lowest, that I realized something important. The only way to truly change the future was to fight for it. I couldn't wait for the world to shift on its own. I had to make it happen. I had to take the fight to the people who had taken so much from me. The future didn't belong to them. It belonged to me and my children. I decided it was time to confront the people who had been manipulating our lives. It wasn't enough to be a passive player in this game anymore. I had to make my move. I started gathering evidence, piecing together the puzzle of what had been happening in the shadows. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep the conspiracy went. There were people at the highest levels of power who had been pulling the strings all along. But it wasn't just about exposing them. It was about taking back control. My children were no longer going to be pawns in their game. I was going to make sure of that, no matter the cost. As I prepared to confront the people who had been destroying our lives, a plan began to form in my mind. I knew that taking them down would be no easy task, but it had to be done. The future was hanging in the balance, and I wasn't about to let them win. The closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. My every move was being watched, my every word scrutinized. But there was no turning back now. I had come too far to give up. The battle for my children's future was about to reach its breaking point. Every decision I made would determine whether or not I succeeded in rewriting their tragic ending. And then, just when I thought I was ready, a shocking twist threatened to undo everything I had worked for. Someone I trusted, someone who had been by my side the whole time, betrayed me. The person I thought was my ally turned out to be a part of the conspiracy I had been fighting against all along. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I have been so blind? The stakes had just gotten higher, and I didn't know who I could trust anymore. With everything at risk, the final confrontation looms ahead. Will I be able to protect my children and rewrite their fate? Or will the forces that have been working against us for so long succeed in tearing us apart? The answer lies in the choices I make next. And time is running out. The betrayal hit harder than anything I could have imagined. The person who had been by my side for so long, who I had confided in, trusted, and even considered a part of my family, was the one who had been orchestrating the events that had led to my children's suffering. The realization made my blood run cold. How could I have been so blind? How could I not see the signs, the subtle shifts in behavior, the whispers behind closed doors? I had to act quickly before the damage became irreparable. My first instinct was to confront this traitor, to make them confess, to unravel the web they had been weaving. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. If I exposed them now, I risked everything. My children's safety, our future, everything we had worked for. The walls were closing in, and every move I made felt like I was walking on the edge of a knife. But then, something unexpected happened. As I began to gather the evidence, piece by piece, I discovered something even more shocking. The betrayal I had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. There were others involved, others I hadn't even considered. High-ranking figures who had been pulling the strings all along. The conspiracy was far deeper than I had realized. And it wasn't just about my children anymore. It was about power, control, and a far-reaching plan that threatened to destroy everything I held dear. I realized then that I couldn't do this alone. I needed to unite those I could trust, no matter how few they were. The game had changed, and I had to play it differently. I reached out to old allies, people I had once trusted and had lost touch with over the years. It was risky, but it was the only way forward. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. Together, we launched a plan, a counterattack against those who had thought they could control us, manipulate us, and determine our fates. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, but I had never been more determined. I would protect my children, rewrite their future, and take back what was rightfully ours. The final confrontation took place in a way none of us had expected. It wasn't a physical battle, but a war of wits, of words, and of truth. We exposed the conspiracy for what it truly was. The people who had been manipulating us were unmasked in front of the world, and their plans crumbled before their eyes.